The following presentation is part of the Technology and the Corporation Conference Series, sponsored by MIT's Industrial Liaison Program.
So yesterday, those of you who followed the tweet stream, I tweeted all day yesterday on the conference. And I have to admit, at this hour, I took a little nap. It was the worst time of the day for me. So in case you're planning to nap, I'm going to give you the summary in a slide as soon as the slides come up.
We may have to put that to sleep and wake it up again.
But the computer went to sleep. So I will attempt to tell you what's on my, in case you went to sleep slide without my slides. So I put down three conclusions. My first conclusion is manufacturing needs innovation and innovation needs manufacturing. I think we heard that from just about every speaker in the last day and a half.
Need your password, Charles. There we go.
The world knows your password, Charles.
It takes a while.
Try again. Okay, so manufacturing needs innovation, innovation needs manufacturing. Second, soil and green, I mean, manufacturing is people, right? That is, manufacturing, particularly we heard this morning, is basically about organizing, motivating, driving, teaching, educating, collaborating with people. And third, and this is my own personal observation, more than what's come out of the conference that I'll say a few words about, is entrepreneurs need operations. Okay? So we didn't talk that much about entrepreneurship, a little bit here and there, but I want to say a little bit more about entrepreneurship. Okay, so manufacturing, so you can sleep now. Those are the 3 points. So manufacturing needs innovation, innovation needs manufacturing. So the way I think about that is the following. I put business and economic success require both creativity and discipline. And I have here the yin and yang of creativity and discipline. And if you look at highly innovative companies, we often say they're very creative, that they are able to come up with new ideas, deploy their new ideas. But those new ideas don't really turn into innovation and economic value unless there's discipline to complement those. And so I think we see in many, many successful companies some connection, some combination, some interplay between creativity and discipline. If you have all discipline and no creativity, not clear that you're in a growth opportunity. And if you have all creativity, not discipline, it's not clear how you make it work. Now, the question is, do we need to proselytize this? So everybody in the, I would say virtually every speaker said some version of manufacturing needs innovation and innovation needs manufacturing. And yet we also said, gee, but outside this room, they don't seem to understand that. That is, outside this room, you get company. So how do you know when to short a stock? When they outsource to Foxconn, right? That is when they separate manufacturing from innovation. 3 years later, short the stock, right? Okay, so Apple outsourced recently, right? So not a prediction there, but the first big customer, of Foxconn was Compaq. Where are they? The second big customer of Compaq was HP, then Nokia, then Dell, right? So you outsource to Compaq, you separate manufacturing from innovation processes. Well, then what's the next step? We had one Foxconn LGO project a few years ago, but they didn't stay. Right? So I'm trying to trigger a little bit of controversy, perhaps, but the companies that over the long haul have been successful, we think, they haven't really separated manufacturing and innovation. Okay, so that's a hypothesis, and I think that's what we heard from all the speakers, and I'm trying to underline it. Any comments about that? This is the last session, so we can have Q&A whenever we want.
I thought, Charlie, that's it.
You think that's a bad idea?
No, I don't know. It's not that it's a bad idea. It's very interesting. The issue is, I would say, I'm not sure I would be that draconian with the words. I would probably say if they completely abdicate manufacturing.
If you abdicate
it's
manufacturing.
It's not necessary to have the execution done outside. It's when you give the thinking outside. So if you execute outside, but you keep the thinking inside and the strategy and the test engineering, quality engineering.
Fair enough. You're trying to be subtle, and I'm trying to be blunt, right?
That's okay.
Yeah, fair enough. There are subtle.
I'm getting older.
Right. There are subtleties to this point, but this is one of the core messages that we heard across the day. All right. So do we know of companies that are good at combining creativity and discipline, that are good at balancing the two, that manage the yin and the yang? So we saw some during the course of the last 2 days, right? So in some sense, we had a long list of companies that came in, that shared with us their thinking, the way they work in different ways. And I think all of them, although they may not have used those words, talked about balancing creativity and discipline and integrating innovation and manufacturing, if you will. So those are examples, but I think the question is, are there models? And so I want to propose that there are 3 models that we might think about. So I want to call them the IDEO model, the Apple model, and the Toyota McDonald's model, and just say a few words about those models as examples of different ways to organize creativity and discipline. Okay? So IDEO is a well-known company that does contract innovation for other companies. And they mostly do product innovation, not process innovation, not manufacturing innovation to a great degree. And they did the first Apple mouse, and there's a long line of products, and they're a very famous company. What are the principles that they follow? So I think there's a range of things that they do. And managing people, they're a firm where the only asset is people. There are no physical assets at all. And so they manage an innovation process where there's respect for everyone, where they seek ideas from a wide variety of sources, they incorporate rapid learning, and they balance creativity and discipline. And how many of you have ever seen the IDEO shopping cart video? Okay, a few, mostly LFM LGO grads. So you see in that video this chaotic process where people are running around with ideas and sticking them on the wall, and then periodically what they call the adults take over. That is, they have the senior people who come in and say, now you have to do this, now you have to do this. That is, they intersperse creativity and discipline in a certain way. And so there are maybe 12 steps to their process. The ones I put in red, I want to emphasize. They say, well, you have to go outside, visit the experts, brainstorm a lot, vote for solutions, create prototypes, and then iterate, iterate, iterate. So in their model, what does innovation look like? It looks like iterate, iterate, iterate prototype, trial and error, trial and error, trial and error. Okay, and where's the discipline? The discipline is these 12 steps. You have to follow the 12 steps. You don't go outside that space. So they have a disciplined structure for a creative process. Now, this is not manufacturing innovation. However, if you read, I'm going to skip this one for a second. If you read Michael Hammer, so he's my guru of process engineering. He's my guru of discipline, if you will. He says, how do you do process engineering? Well, if you look at what I wrote in red, encourage aggressively creative ideas, use prototypes, be fast, be focused. Everything should be on the table. That is, clean sheet of paper. And be fast, be improvisational and iterative. It's exactly what IDEO says. He says engineer processes exactly the way IDEO says engineer products. Okay? So I think what we see is that there is a, if you will, recipe for the discipline of creativity or the creativity of discipline. That's along these lines. Now, the other point to be made, I think, is that how does strategy impact how you should think about integrating creativity and discipline? And this should be familiar to many people, but if you're doing continuous incremental improvement, that's different from jumping to the next paradigm. So we just heard that Novartis is jumping to a new paradigm in manufacturing. That's a discontinuous innovation. Do you do innovation the same way for incremental continuous innovation as you do for disruptive? My view is that the IDEO/Michael Hammer view of innovation, that's more for disruptive innovation. That's for a clean sheet of paper, trying to do something completely new. We need to be innovative, we need to be creative, but we also have to have a disciplined process around that. Okay? So if you're jumping, then you need one set of processes. On the other hand, what if you're doing lots of continuous incremental improvement? What's the model there? Okay. That's the Toyota model. But before I go to the Toyota model, I'm going to do the Apple model. Okay. So the Apple model, in some sense, I think of as embodied in its founder and leader, where we've got creativity over here and we've got discipline over there, and they're all embodied in the same person. There are lots of companies you have, in some sense, Mr. Creativity and Mrs. Discipline, or Mrs. Creativity and Mr. Discipline, or whatever that is. There are some people in the organization whose minds and whose work styles are more focused toward being creative, being innovative, and there are other people who are just really organized, really process-focused, really disciplined, and those people complement each other. And productive organizations that balance creativity and discipline have a combination of people who are creative and disciplined. Not so at Apple, seemingly, at least at the top, right? So look at the incredible discipline of how he sells apples. I'm the Apple salesman, and I'm here to sell you the apples. And here's I'm the guy who's going to be creative, think differently, et cetera. And same guy. I think this is a relatively unusual model and hard to replicate. So I don't want to say that much more about it. Right? So, but I think enormously successful. But many of us can't be both incredibly focused on the discipline stuff and at the same time wild-eyed and creative. If you walk around the MIT campus and you walk into different labs, you can sort of see which ones have the wild-eyed folks and which ones have the disciplined folks. Right? Not that you can't combine it, but I think there are differences in personality sometimes such that it's hard to be both. Okay? So we get creativity and discipline. What's the Toyota and McDonald's model? So I think very, very different way of implementing creativity and discipline. Okay? So you look at I like both of these companies for the following: that there's a process, there's a disciplined standard way to do every task. At McDonald's, whether it's making the French fries, flipping the hamburgers, cleaning the bathrooms. At Toyota, whether it's how do you install the wheels as the car's going down the line, or how do you solve a quality problem. There's a standard way to do everything. And there's a manual that tells you exactly that standard way. So incredible discipline around tasks, incredible discipline around communication. There's a standard way to close every communication link in the manufacturing organization, in the supply chain organization, if you're at Toyota or McDonald's. And the end-to-end processes are also standardized. You sort of clean the bathrooms at McDonald's the same no matter what part of the world you're in, if you will. Standard processes. So if you have standardized tasks, standardized communication, and standardized processes, that sounds pretty static. That sounds like an organization that's not going to change and not going to grow. But they say, no, there's a standardized way to change things called essentially the scientific method, right? So we're going to be very, very disciplined about, we have a hypothesis, we run an experiment, we collect the data, we have a conclusion, we make a change, and then we repeat again and again and again. You can't experiment on the line at Toyota. You have to go through the scientific method. So we are able to be creative, we are able to bring about change, but in a very disciplined environment. So I think this looks very, very different from IDEO's balance of creativity and discipline, and it's a different model, but again we see they're doing both. They're doing creative processes and they're imposing discipline on their processes. And so you get the balance. Okay? So a side note on the scientific method, I read an article once that said the scientific method is the greatest single innovation in the history of mankind, because it enables us to do everything else that we've done. From cavemen trying to figure out how to make fire, they used the scientific method, to trying to get space shuttles to go up in the air, to try to get continuous manufacturing of pharmaceuticals, we use the scientific method. Right? However, it may not be enough for the following reason. And for those of you who are fans of system dynamics, it's the plea of system dynamics that if you're going to run an experiment and see a result of that experiment, you have to know what you're testing for. You have to have a controlled environment, and you've got to be able to see cause and effect. And if our systems problems are too complex, so take the war on drugs, or the war on poverty, or the war on terrorism, or the war on greenhouse gases, those problems are so complex that it's very hard to say, okay, we're going to run an experiment and see how it turns out, right? It's just much harder. You need systems models in some sense. And so I think as useful as the scientific method is, we need to be able to have systems representation of complex environments if we're going to be able to continue to combine creativity and discipline in the more difficult environments that we have and the problems that we have to solve. That's a little bit of an aside. Okay. So conclusion number one, I think, is manufacturing needs innovation. Innovation needs manufacturing. Companies need to find a way, organizations need to find a way to combine creativity and discipline. And there's more than one way to do that. No single model. Okay? Second conclusion, manufacturing is people. Right? So we heard a lot. And so I put love and discipline with humanity and humility. Right? That we need to understand the people side of the equation. We need to engage people. I think Cindy from the UAW clearly spoke from her heart in trying to help people kind of comprehend what do we mean by humanity and humility? What do we mean by cooperation and collaboration? And her message, I think, was essentially everybody in the union, they want to help too. They want to contribute their minds as well. It's not the case. So you can't wind back the clock to Frederick W. Taylor, who said, we got two kinds of people, those with brains and those with hands. And the people with the hands can turn off their brains. Right? Nobody wants to play that role anymore. Right? People want to use their hands and their brains. And so we've got, and furthermore, the system works in the following sense, that if you respect people, if you take care of people, if you invest in people, if you say, we want to engage your mind as well as your hands, then people respond. They say, yeah, we'll help. We want to contribute our ideas. If you tell us there's a process for improvement, we'll engage in that process. We don't need to be wild-eyed, but we'll do the investment, we'll do the improvement, we'll do the innovation, and then that generates more profits, and you reinvest the profits in your partners, right? It's not, there are two ways to get low costs, right? There's low wages and there's high productivity, and they're different. Low wages means ultimately that you dumb down as much as possible and pay the cheapest possible and the most ignorant people you can find in some sense, and pay them the lowest wage because they can't get any other job, right? That's one way to get low costs in the short term, right? But the other way is high productivity. That is, have people engaged in this process. So I think that was the second message of the conference broadly, that manufacturing is people, and that one has to figure out how to engage all the people. And people talk about, well, there's government people, there's academia people, there's industry people, there's labor, there's management, et cetera, but that this is ultimately a collaborative enterprise. Okay? So that was what I got out of conclusion number 2. My commentary. Anything else? You okay with that? Other comments? Okay. So my third point, and this was didn't really so much come out in the conference, but it's this is the one I want to sell. Entrepreneurs need operations. Okay, so here's my thinking. Small entrepreneurs who master operations are more likely to grow up to be large entrepreneurs and employers. Right? So the opposite is, imagine you're a wonderful entrepreneur, but you think, oh, it's all about marketing and finance and product development. It's not about manufacturing. Manufacturing is hard. Manufacturing is irrelevant. It's low value. So I'll invest in product development and marketing and finance, and I'll outsource the manufacturing. Right? So you get a self-fulfilling prophecy. We don't know how to do manufacturing, therefore we don't do manufacturing, therefore we never learn how to do manufacturing, therefore we outsource manufacturing. Right? So my view on this one is, if we have entrepreneurs who understand how to do manufacturing, understand how to do operations, they say, oh, that's part of the game, we need to master that just the way we need to master the other stuff, they'll learn how to be good at it, and they won't outsource it or offshore it as much. You look at companies that are startups in the US that are successful in operations. I like Southwest Airlines as an example. Southwest Airlines said, we embrace operations. We want to be great at operations. And they learned to be a small company that was good at operations, and then a big company that learned to be good at operations. So if we want to have large employers that are strong in operations, perhaps they need to grow up from being small employers who are good at operations. Okay. The other point, I think I said them both. I combined these. Okay. Less likely to offshore. Okay. So if you look at our curriculum, and I'll talk at the Sloan School and our LGO program, I would say we don't know very much about how to teach operations to entrepreneurs. That is, we know how to teach how do you run operations if you're Toyota or Walmart or Zara or some big company. We don't teach very well, I think, how do you grow your operations from a 5-person organization to a 10, to a 50, to 100? That is, how do you build an operations capability from scratch to eventually grow up to be the Toyota or the Zara or the Walmart or whatever? So that's my my horse these days is to try to develop a course called Operations for Entrepreneurs, and to try, in some sense, to look at different size organizations from the tiniest, where there's a one-person operations shop, and so you talk to somebody who has 5 people in ops and you say, how did you get from 1 to 5? And then you talk to somebody who's got 25 and say, how did you get from 5 to 25? And so in some sense, the research strategy is to do a bunch of cases of all different size entrepreneurial organizations, and at each stage ask them, how'd you go from that stage to the next stage? And the compilation hopefully will give us some better insights as to what do you do to build an operations capability. So I've been interviewing a range of people on this set of questions. And some people say process discipline is everything, and other people say process flexibility is everything, right? So I already got 2 points of view. And some people say, sure. Right. So what are the principles below that? You need process discipline. You need process flexibility, right? So here's, I think there are 3 stages: nail it, scale it, and sail it, right? That is, the first stage is you've got to nail your idea, right? You got to figure out, what? Yes, question, come. Right. So I probably, maybe not everyone could hear you, so I'm going to try to abbreviate radically what you said. But she's basically saying maybe outsourcing operations is different from outsourcing manufacturing, and outsourcing manufacturing may be about finding people with complementary assets like Foxconn, right, who may be a productive manufacturing partner. And so then my Foxconn question comes into play, right? That is, are you getting yourself into deep water by outsourcing to the Foxconn of your industry, even though it's faster and cheaper in the short term? Or are you better off trying to figure out other ways to do it? And I would acknowledge it depends on the circumstances, and you said depends on the funding model. How much money do we have? And so you talk to startups who say, well, I only have enough money to do product development, so I'm not going to do operations in-house. And they lose control of their business, or they can't manage their operations. And there's just not a recognition that if you can't do operations in manufacturing as a startup, maybe that's going to be your Achilles heel. Maybe, I mean, you can tell the VCs, oh yeah, we can outsource that, but can you make it work? Can you even do the prototyping cycles when you've outsourced your manufacturing? It's awfully tough to do when you're doing something new. Okay. So, okay. All right. So I'm casting this as a research project in the following sense. And so the reason I'm talking about it in this forum is because we need case study victims, right? So we need to find companies who are willing to say, this is the path that we went on, and you can write a case about us, and you can begin to try to piece together the components of what are the decision points between nail it and scale it. Between the time you finish your idea, you try to build it. And what happens when you finish scaling it? Can you kind of ride it off into continuous improvement land where you're more stable? And what do those stages look like? And what are the success models? And I'm not expecting there's one success model, but what we like to do is be somewhat systematic about identifying where are all the forks in the road as you're building an operations capability. If you search the entrepreneurship literature, there's 100 books on how to raise money and how to do your marketing for every book that aspires to tell you how to build your operations capability as an entrepreneur. It's just there's a hole there. And I think we want to try to fill that knowledge hole because it's, as was said so eloquently early today, for our children, if not for us, the next generation of companies that comes along, maybe they'll be better at manufacturing operations than the current generation. Okay? So what else? All conclusions are temporary. No. Those are all my remarks. But because I'm not the only one who sat here for the last 2 days, I thought we should have plenty of time for other people to say what they thought were the takeaways from the conference and to try to contribute to the tweet stream, if nothing else. So I propose that we open to Q&A for a couple minutes, and then we end at least on time, if not better.
Very quick comment, Charlie. I heard a lot about regionalization and growing business regionally.
Yeah.
That wasn't on there.
Ah, okay. So I didn't say anything about regionalization, and now, so whoever's tweeting now, please add that to the tweet stream. Any other sort of conclusions or comments?
I like your idea about the operations and entrepreneurs, but I will say that for small companies and entrepreneurs, the marketing and sales and development and so forth, the people that you're dealing with are a little bit more fun. And the operation side is not quite as much fun sometimes.
Not fun because it's hard to do, or not fun because they're boring non-party lovers?
Well, it's maybe it's the discipline, but there are a certain amount of roadblocks, you know, with all of the regulations that you have to deal with. Also, you alluded to the fact of raising money, and which for both the capital and the manufacturing employees that are involved, and that's a little bit risky. And so I think sometimes entrepreneurs tend to want to, it's not that they want to necessarily outsource the operations, they just want to outsource some of that risk. And I think if you can reduce some of that risk, which is in a previous comment I made, I think that would be helpful. And because entrepreneurs, I don't think it's that they don't necessarily want operations. It's just that it is a little bit risky and maybe it's not quite as much fun. But once you get into it, it's not too bad after all.
Take him to the brainwashing booth, because if we heard anything this week, the last 2 days, it was that manufacturing is fun. Right? That is where it's just we have an image problem.
So,
Tom.
so Charlie, we've ended up with an entirely radical manufacturing transformation proposal from Novartis, and then thinking back on the 2 days of operations issues that we've talked about. If we put this through the filter of risk management and thinking about how companies deploy new technologies, one of the reasons in industries like biologics that we end up with so much old technology is simply because at each stage of the regulatory approval process, the finishing, the packaging, and so on and so forth, we have pre-existing approvals. So generally when we introduce a new process, we're not reintroducing everything from the ground up. And it dawned on me after the president of Novartis left that this is just an extraordinarily, from a regulatory approval, safety management, risk management, just a very, very far-reaching and high-risk transformational strategy, and a very unusual example, and one that bears examination in terms of all the subject matters that were addressed over the course of the last couple of days. And I wondered if, you know, as you thought about this from a very high level, I mean, just how you thought about that, you know, quantifying that risk and controlling that risk as you throw out, you know, all your approvals for all your coatings for all your pills, you know, and start with an entirely new process.
So I would agree with you that Novartis's venture, which is a very expensive venture by most corporate standards, the amount of money that they're putting into this experiment, if you will, is big. It's a big investment. It's a big bet. You saw the payoff numbers, shrinking the production time from a year to 6 hours. And as I understand, and I've had a little opportunity to work with them on this project, they're doing a lot to try to mitigate the risk. The technical risk, the regulatory risk, the operational risk, the talent development risk, because very different kinds of jobs are going to be involved in manufacturing in this environment than their existing environment. So I think they're trying to be very systematic about, let's look at all the different kinds of risks. They're managing it like a good operations person, right? You build your PERT chart, your project management chart, you figure out what are all the different branches, what do we have to chase down, how do we be disciplined about nailing down all the pieces. So they are a company of a sufficient financial size that they can take on a game changer like that. Not everybody does that every day, right? Yeah.
One of the things I thought I would hear when I came was a little bit more talk about, and maybe this will help kickstart your study, is looking at Kickstarter with the new crowdsourcing.
Right, yeah.
And where's you got that up there?
Yeah. No. Go ahead.
Anyway, so it's that's another revolution that's happening, is where someone could take an idea, a piece of aluminum, and raise $1.6 million from an idea, and now you have like a workforce of one. So where does that fit into this whole new model? And that's kind of a new thing, isn't it, over the next?
So there's process innovation there in the process of how you raise money and how you start a company. There's crowdsourcing and open sourcing, and I think that's part of the innovation models, right? So it's another take on a model for creativity, combining creativity and discipline. Yeah, you're right. Nobody talked about that very explicitly, partly because wasn't a lot of talk about entrepreneurship, right? But most of if I go all the way back to here, most of our visitors were people from relatively large established companies, right? And so maybe next year we'll have an Operations for Entrepreneurs conference, and we'll invite a bunch of people from small companies. We'll hear a lot more about open innovation, these other kinds of things. Okay, there's another. You have the mic.
Yeah, I heard a lot about the image of manufacturing, and I'm kind of posed at lunch to my table about kind of how the American dream might have an impact on this, and that every parent wants something better for their kids, and every kid should be, if they have the ambition, want something better than their parents had. So if we have the force that, brought us out of World War II and the manufacturing industry, and all of their kids want something better, I guess the question is, how do we make the image of manufacturing better than what the parents had?
Yeah. So I think this is very culturally based, right? Because my sense of Germany is that parents who spend their lives in manufacturing are perfectly happy to have their kids spend their lives in manufacturing, and you get a good job and a good wage. And you look at people in the trades, plumbers and carpenters and electricians in America, you have generations after generations who take on the business of their parents of being a tradesperson, and you can make a good living doing that as well. And they don't outsource plumbing to China either, right? It's a social and cultural construct about what are good jobs and what are bad jobs, and we should have clean hands and stay in air-conditioned offices all day, as opposed to we get our hands dirty and we work in factories. And as was said earlier, factories are getting cleaner. But there is a national issue about, well, what are we going to do productive as a nation? And I think we can't all be each other's hairdressers and financial advisors. I mean, somebody has to make something. I don't know what else to say about it, right? Yeah.
Charlie, we talked a lot about manufacturing physical objects, but more and more of the things that are manufactured, physical or not, have a high content of software. When it comes to cyber physical systems and networked, one of the first things that got outsourced was software creation. Do you think that the software factory concept applies to the thinking that should that be coming back? Is there a problem separating it?
Yeah. So aside from I didn't even write SAP up here, and I should have, because we had the SAP guy. But aside from the SAP guy, we mostly had people here talking about making physical stuff as opposed to making software. But clearly, making software and making electronic products that have a large software component is a big part of economic growth and economic development over the last several decades. Right? So I don't think we should exclude them. I think this conference focused more narrowly than thinking about software as a product. But there's lots of software, and Yeah, and there are software factories, and then software community, which I don't know that well, but my sense is they have processes for creativity and discipline. That the software people have approaches for how do you do structured programming or et cetera. But there's also lots of opportunity for creativity there. Those models I'm less familiar with, but I would acknowledge certainly software is an important product, and one wants to be both creative and disciplined in one's approach to developing software. Okay. Other comments? Don?
So two things. There's actually two other companies that should go there, which are, of course, Heartland and iRobot. And those both suggest that, as does Novartis, is that maybe a fourth conclusion is about the nature of manufacturing technology, manufacturing jobs, that if we're going to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. on a large scale, that we're going to have to get good at figuring out how to do these jobs. So that's one. The other thing is...
Somebody tweet that. We need a fourth thing about...
Yeah. The other comment is, even today, when we talk about the image of manufacturing, there are still some issues on the part of management of our company. So a few years ago, we had 4 members of the LGO governing board come in to speak to the new students. Some of them will remember this event very well. And they all come in and said, look, we want you to come into manufacturing, but they're great jobs, but if you come in, we want you to suffer and not have a life, because that's what it's going to require. And, you know, understandably, that message wasn't taken that well. But I think that in terms of making manufacturing attractive,
So I would acknowledge that point, but if you go work for Goldman Sachs, they say the same thing to you. That is, you want to work here, you're going to suffer. We're going to make you work 100 hours a week for the next N years, right? And but
we'll pay you well.
But we'll pay you well, right? Pay for pain, yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Other comments? Yeah.
One of the things that you started off talking about was obviously the linkage between the innovation and the manufacturing.
Right.
We've seen that, and I think everybody here feels very strongly about that. I think one of the challenges is that the measurements for the cost of labor, the cost of shipping, the cost of all the other components are easy to characterize. Do you have a view to how to characterize what is the value, what is the financial value, if you will, of the innovation? Again, we heard GM today, we heard about a $400,000 versus $10 savings, so we have one anecdote for $399,000. But any other measures out there that we've seen?
So you're saying, how do we quantify the value of innovation? Is that your question?
Yeah, how we quantify the value of innovation in relation to manufacturing, trying to co-locate them, where does that add value?
Yeah. I don't have a pithy answer for that one. It's hard work, right? And it is the case that a lot of companies, it's management by spreadsheets, and if you can't put down the value of something in a spreadsheet, then you can't really talk about it, right? And so one needs to have a metric for being able to quantify the value of innovation. We went through the same thing with what's the value of quality, right? And we saw empirically that ultimately low quality means lost customers, lost revenues, and being driven out of business. But that's where the system dynamics comes in some sense, because if the lags are long between the cause and the effect, and we can't measure it in this quarter's spreadsheet, then we tend to ignore it, right? And in fact, those cause and effect things are real. They just have longer time frames. And so that's the plea for systems thinking and system dynamics modeling, that you can't quantify everything in immediate payback connected to immediate choices made.
An example to that would be what Novartis is doing. Novartis is
Yeah.
trying to connect the dots and look at the immediate payback of what they did. They would have never done it. It's really the leap of faith and strategic directions what they're changing their processes, right?
Yeah,
So
this is
that's
a-
innovation in the
yeah,
product. That's
yeah,
an
it's a-
example.
Exactly. The Novartis thing's a 10-year payback before they see a dime, if they see it.
So
Right?
that's not very good.
Yeah. Other comments? Yes.
I can try to quantify that. At my company, we're always debating vertical integration versus outsourcing, and oftentimes it's going both directions at the same time for different components. And I was adamantly against vertically integrating one component because I thought we could manage a couple suppliers against each other to get the price reduction. And I lost the argument. We vertically integrated, and That factory found all of the subcomponents were also overpriced, and they took cost out of every single subcomponent within the vertical integration. And it's spawning off millions of dollars in cost reduction because we're now manufacturing the part. And we never would have known that if we weren't manufacturing the part. So I was clearly wrong in that argument because I thought that we had a better model with a supplier model. And vertical integration carries the infinite treadmill. You have to be on that treadmill forever once you're vertically integrated. But it does have opportunities to provide lots and lots of other cost reductions.
Okay. Yes.
Speaking of lags in terms of system dynamics, I mean, even if everyone comes out of this conference and we're going to do the right thing and the rest of the nation is going to follow us, it's going to take some time before innovation and the jobs come back and everything else picks up to a certain level. How do we maintain everyone focused on doing the things that we're saying we're going to do until we get to that level?
Yeah. Well, I think that's part of the leadership story. I made the comment. So we heard about some of President Obama's initiatives that he's taking in his 4th year, right? And I made a comment on the side to someone, well, if he's not reelected, forget about all that stuff, right? Exactly. If he is reelected, then perhaps for 4 years, we'll have a leader who said, I'm going to do something, and then that policy will stay in place for 4 years if Congress doesn't cut the funding or something like that, right? But it requires leadership, right? A leader like Mr. Jimenez or Mr. Obama, whoever it is, has to say, I believe in something and I'm going to invest in it during the whole time of the lag between the time you invest and the time you see the return. Because we have the worse before better phenomenon here, right? It goes down before it goes up. You go here, then you go here, then you go here, right? And it's very easy to bail out when you're in the worst part, right? And you've got to have the vision and the stick-to-itiveness and the persistence to say, okay, that didn't work. We've got to try something else. Got to try something else to make it over the hump, right? Absolutely. So I think that's the leadership story in part. Yes.
Comment about number 2, manufacturing as people or people's manufacturing. And when Cindy Estrada was up talking about the role of labor and a worker, and I asked a question about AMP, and she didn't know much about that.
Right.
I think there's a message there that to AMP that's really a missing piece.
Yep.
We have academia, industry, and government probably should have labor and engage in that too.
Yeah.
Maybe one more?
Okay, last comment? Yes.
May not want to tweet this one. Thought we'll end on a light note, talking about manufacturing as people and image and all that. I had a plant in France reporting to me where wine was being served in the cafeteria during lunchtime. And, for the obvious reasons, we tried to get that off the menu. It was a, huge cultural change. But right after that, absenteeism went up, and there were a lot of transfer requests to marketing. So people who work on this image thing, please do take it seriously.
Okay. All right. Serve wine in the factories in France.
Okay. Thank you, Charlie.
Okay, thank you.